American Krogan presents Lessons in Deconstructionism and Pseudo-Intellectual Moral Factory. Recently, a South African YouTuber, Josh Pieters, released a documentary exploring the personality of George Gilbert, a young Englishman who was kicked off the British reality TV show Big Brother for supposedly making anti-Semitic remarks. The documentary doesn't reveal what the remarks were, but George explains them on Andrew Gould's YouTube channel.
Nobody ever is wholly good or evil. I think people who are evil are probably misguided. People who are good, yin yang and all that, they've got some bad in their personality. Who's the most evil person ever to exist? If you ask Joe Public, who's the most evil person? Hitler, most people would say. And there's a case for that. But I said, Hitler probably wasn't sitting there funding the Holocaust and going, oh, I'm so evil. He was probably going, this needs to be done. I'm a good guy. And Jews are at the trouble of Germany's ills. Yeah. They're the root cause of all this. Yeah. And now we know that's wrong.
Now, whatever you think of Hitler, these comments can hardly be taken as anti-Semitic. Although, technically, George does take things a bit further later on.
Some of the finest minds in human history, from Cicero to Shakespeare, Voltaire to Henry Ford to Roald Dahl, all of those guys had anti-Semitic tropes in their writings. Fact. Now, they're some of the most intellectual people of all time. They don't write about Shylock in The Merchant of Venice for a laugh. They got their head screwed on, and they must have thought what they think for a reason, like them or hate them, right or wrong. And anti-Semitism has been around for millennia now, centuries upon centuries. Now, all I said was, so it does make me think, is it a case of no smoke without fire?
Now, to give credit where it's due, Andrew, despite being Jewish himself, did recognize here the nuance of George's statements, and it's pretty obvious within the broader context of the interview that George has rather favorable views toward the Jews.
I think it's terrible how the Jewish community, even in London, a lot of Jews are fleeing London because they don't feel safe. There's a lot of reasons to love Jews. I think they're great with integrating. They contribute to society more than many other communities.
Now, to be clear, I don't share George's views here, at least not on this particular subject matter, and the work I've done over the years should make that readily apparent. I'm also very critical of Andrew Gould's stated attitudes toward English identity, which are largely just as deconstructionist as the quote-unquote woke people he often critiques.
Of English ethnicity then, how do we boil that down? What do you do with kind of Saxons, Anglo-Saxons, Celts, all of those kinds of things?
So this is an argument that leftists would always, and civic nationalists.
But Andrew is not a shock jock or a sensationalist. Pieters, on the other hand, took a soundbite of what Gilbert said on Gould's program and made it appear a lot more offensive than it really was.
What George was actually referring to was his abrupt removal from the house, followed by Big Brother cutting ties with him entirely and choosing not to release the footage of the incident. With no official explanation, George was left to fill in the gaps, giving his version of events across a circuit of podcasts and news outlets that were more than happy to have him.
And I said, some of the finest minds in human history, from Cicero to Shakespeare, all of those guys had anti-Semitic tropes in their writings. Fact. Now, they're some of the most intellectual people of all time. So it does make me think, is it a case of no smoke without fire?
Maybe it should be noted here that Pieters gained internet fame by pulling pranks on various people. Of particular note is when he invited Kate Hopkins to a fake award ceremony. But the now reformed and very serious documentarian wanted to know more about George Gilbert, the edgy sensationalist Englishman who had been making the rounds on right-wing podcasts after being canceled by mainstream outlets. So he traveled to George's hometown of Finchingfield, where George gave him a tour of the lovely picturesque village. Sadly, but unsurprisingly, George has had trouble holding down a job ever since being canceled. His former employer at a cleaning service fired him, and he was even removed from his position as a local parish councilor. Now, he works as a delivery driver. Josh, of course, takes on the role of a compassionate and impartial bystander just trying to understand a troubled young man who, he posits, was perhaps misled by the Manosphere. The documentary really tries to focus on associating George's behavior with the rising popularity of performative online antics that are often antisocial for the sake of clicks. Now, I actually agree with Josh that this emergent culture is a problem, but not only has he been a major player in it, But he also seems to want to attribute the rise of nationalistic sentiments and identity politics to antisocial antics of the likes of Andrew Tate and Sneeko.
Some people disagree with that.
If you come to a country, speak the language of the country.
They don't even talk the English language. They don't bother with that. Why should they?
You come to America, speak English, assimilate.
The least you could do is respect this country by trying to integrate.
This can create something of an echo chamber of masculine ideals that simultaneously connects men and isolates them.
I learned something about women. They have no interest in world conquest. They want to be comfortable.
It's not that women are being cheated of those opportunities, it's just that women don't fancy doing them as much.
But they're too busy arguing with their wife to do anything about it.
It's just like a bit of a hindrance.
Distraction is all garbage.
Now, in my humble opinion, it's probably more accurate to attribute the rise of these grotesque behaviors to a breakdown in national identity, cohesion, and social trust. In other words, he's got it backwards. In a healthy society, none of these figures would be tolerated. George states that he loves his hometown and its aesthetics. He thinks it's the best of Britain, but admits it's no longer the most accurate representation of it. That if you go to the average high street, it has Turkish barber shops and too many takeaways.
If I'm going to show someone from abroad what life is like in Britain, I'd love to take them here. I think this is the best of Britain. I wouldn't say it's an accurate representation of current Britain. If you go to the average high street, it doesn't look like this, does it? It looks like a Turkish barber's and too many takeaways and about 11 charity shops.
What exactly does this have to do with Andrew Tate or Sneeko? Perhaps Josh can clip a soundbite of Sneeko saying things like immigrants should assimilate, but Sneeko also thinks that everyone should convert to Islam.
If everybody was Muslim the way it should be, we'd have world peace, but people have their ego. They're attached to tribalism, to their race, to nation. They're patriotic. They have stupid reasons to hold them.
Both he and Andrew Tate are also rather rootless and cosmopolitan. They're certainly not raising goats in rural England.
You love this place? Yeah, well, the goats, you see them come and go, because obviously they die. Yeah, circle of life. So yeah, I've seen a few generations of goats, but that's a sanctuary.
Josh does a ride-along with George on his delivery job and dedicates a substantial segment of the documentary to a back-and-forth conversation with George about his celibacy, his losses, and potential depression. He tries to appear compassionate, but it seemed clear that his aim was to accentuate the consequences of George's alleged misbehavior and patriotism.
I felt like I had everything. I was a parish councillor, the YouTube was going well, and in about 10 days on Big Brother, I fucked it up. I'd lost it all. And yeah, you just feel futile. Like, what's the point? All I've got is a blooming delivery driver job. I'm not even earning minimum wage.
His antics become fairly obvious at certain points. For example, earlier in the documentary, Josh noticed a bottle of hand lotion on George's bedside stand and has the camera focus on it before he places it behind a picture out of sight. This was extremely distasteful to do to a man who had invited him into his home and was, for all intents and purposes, being sincere and honest with him. The irony, of course, is that Josh had accused George of being provocative for the sake of attention.
It seems like sometimes you ask questions more to be provocative.
I call it being facetious.
Again, Josh himself had built an entire brand off provocation, and in this instance, despite trying to remarket himself as a thoughtful documentarian, he was being juvenile with this little antic, especially in the broader context of George's overall presentation. George is a very well-dressed and kept man. His room is highly presentable and orderly, and he's articulate and thoughtful. He's clearly not some disheveled porn addict. In fact, what stood out to me was just how resilient and perseverant George is. Despite all his setbacks, despite all his obstacles, he refuses to even accept the idea that he's depressed.
We didn't build an empire through feeling sorry for ourselves, sitting in bed all day. It goes against what we should be as men.
Josh once again tries to make a connection between George's sentiments here and the likes of Andrew Tate.
A lot of what George had said to me throughout this documentary was eerily familiar.
Real men cry, and if women can cry, men can cry too. There's nothing wrong with it. And there absolutely is something wrong with it. The hallmark of a real man is controlling himself, controlling his emotions, and acting appropriately
I share Josh's sentiment that the Manosphere can be a rather bizarre and unhealthy place.
You actually took a hammer to your face to shape your jawbone.
But it probably only exists because feminism and other post-war liberal doctrines have eroded an otherwise stable and functional societal paradigm. Basic male and female dispositions have remained and are in conflict with the new asserted values. The end result is a void full of antisocial characters.
I'd like to say to thousands of women listeners who imagine that they're enjoying life at the kitchen sink.
Women unite. You have nothing to lose but your kitchen sink.
So are you suggesting that marriage is out of the picture?
Well, what do you gain?
Shit.
But listening to George voice's attitudes about women, he doesn't exactly sound like someone regurgitating Andrew Tate talking points. He sounds like he wants what most Englishmen and women wanted 80 years ago.
What does the right woman look like for George Gilbert?
Someone who's well-read, well-educated, speaks well, dresses well, polite.
Josh explains in the documentary at one point that he's half Jewish, so perhaps it's not surprising that he took issue with the fact that George had books about Hitler on his shelf. George explained, however, that he also had books about other historical figures, and that his aim was to learn about history and why certain things happened.
But you do seem quite intent on talking about it.
Yeah, but I've also got a Karl Marx book. I've also got an Alex Ferguson book, an Elton John book. Why aren't we talking about that? Because you've chosen to, because it looks good, and it'll make this go viral. Because you'll clip this and go, who's got Hitler books? I told you he's an anti-Semite. I'm not having a go at you, but this is what people do. It makes for good content. So yes, people are going to look at this and go, oh, I'm so concerned, he is an anti-Semite, he is a Nazi. No.
This is, again, somewhat ironic because the big thesis of Josh's documentary is that George was probably a sensationalist who said outrageous things for attention.
Made in the UK.
It seems that for those looking to get into the limelight, a shortcut has emerged. Outrage.
1,000 men in 24 hours.
Xanax, benzos.
Kids loved Hitler.
And yet the more...
What's even more remarkable, though, is that Josh expresses in the same scene confusion as to why George wouldn't have had the forethought to remove those books from his room before allowing the film crew in.
If I were you, and I had a film crew coming to my house today, I would probably have moved those books.
Yeah, well, you wanted an authentic take of my life, and these are topics I'm interested in.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm not going to hide things. This is who I am.
But if anything, this was a remarkable showcase of just how much more character and backbone George has than the average person. He's not being provocative, he's being principled and courageous. In another scene, Josh accuses George of not learning from his mistakes.
I don't see it as a bad thing. If someone said, oh...
But you don't have to see it as a bad thing. You understand that can be perceived as offensive by people, and you've just said it on camera to an audience of people. And so it's almost like you don't learn.
At another point in the documentary, George also expresses how we white people are an extreme minority in the world, especially those of us with fair hair and eyes. This is something he has repeatedly stated in public settings. Josh seems to be threatened by this.
One of the rarest genetic makeups with blue eyes, white skin and red hair. I feel like I should carry that on, and so maybe I should find a partner who can do that.
Is that not a bit... You don't think that's a bit weird?
No. I've seen influencers who are black. They call themselves melanin goddesses. I love my black skin. Good luck to you.
No, I don't
Go
think
you.
it's, I don't
but
think
you don't have fun with them. You are coming for me. Why is that?
Because I don't think it's weird to love your own genetics. I do think it's weird to be sort of into mating with someone with the same genetics in order to have offsprings who carry those genetics too.
There is absolutely nothing weird about George's sentiments here. His desire is a perfectly normal human behavior, and as he highlights himself later, a myriad of ethno-religious groups around the world practice it overtly without others questioning it. The behavior is only pathologized in white people. Curiously, in another one of Josh's documentaries, he interviews Lily Phillips, an OnlyFans star who undergoes a publicity stunt of sleeping with 100 men in a day.
I'm Lily Phillips, and today I'm getting ran through by 100 guys.
He doesn't call her weird, undermine how she makes her money, or seriously question the trend of young men and women degrading themselves en masse. He calls her a businesswoman and claims her parents are, quote, forward-thinking and open-minded for supporting her.
Your family and your parents are proud of you and what you've achieved. your parents must be very sort of forward-thinking and open-minded, which is great, because I think...
To be fair, Josh does eventually express some concern over the safety of Lily's stunt, but again, he doesn't seem to fundamentally question her lifestyle. His concern is that she isn't properly vetting the men, that one of them might be a criminal. He also doesn't really try to talk her out of it, and strangely, right before she starts her stunt, he tells her to, quote, kill it, and to, quote, drink lots of fluids. The whole affair was rather bizarre. Now, that's obvious and goes without saying, but what I'm getting at is that while people tried to act as if it were totally acceptable behavior, all the faces of all the participants, Lily's family members, and even her own assistants were censored. On some level, everyone involved knew that the behavior signified moral bankruptcy. But returning to the topic at hand, that is, George Gilbert's desire to have children with red hair and blue eyes, Josh subsequently accuses him of flirting with eugenics.
Are you saying these things because you genuinely mean them, or are you trying to be on the edge and be entertaining? Because what you're saying borders very close to eugenics.
No, I'm genuinely interested in preserving it.
George seems a little baffled by the implication, and it is rather peculiar because George never mentioned eugenics or ever suggested that this was part of his ideological outlook. Josh, like so many others today, probably sees anyone who wants to preserve their white racial characteristics as being on the verge of wanting to genocide everyone else. He tries to associate George's statements with the Holocaust, but even if we all agree about the traditional narrative of those events, George has repeatedly denounced Hitler, and more importantly, George's people had nothing to do with that event, did they? His people fought against the Nazis, and the thanks they're getting today appears to be a perpetual deconstruction of their identity and the reduction of themselves to a minority in their homeland. In a promotional video for the documentary on X, the topic of who is and isn't ethnically English comes up.
If all the ethnically English people were to leave, then England as a country and as a culture would change.
What do you class as someone as ethnically English?
Well, somebody whose family tree originates from Britain or England.
How far back does that have to go?
How long's a piece of string? From my mum's side, this is maternally, they reckon we descend from the French Huguenots, who were a Protestant collective who were ostracised from mainland Europe because they were Protestant.
So not originally English?
No, as far as I know, it is way back. But,
I always wanted to stunt so hard. I always wanted to ride that whip.
This was another obnoxious attempt to undermine George's common sense views. Many of the replies on the social media post, however, unfortunately seem to agree with Josh that English isn't an ethnicity because it was formed from smaller distinct groups. Basically, that there is no such thing as English because of the Norman invasion or because of limited mixing with Celts, etc. The reality is that there is not a single ethnicity on the planet that was not formed by two or more previous ethnicities. Thus, is Josh arguing that ethnicity doesn't exist? That it's an entirely illegitimate concept? I don't think so. I don't believe Josh and others would claim, for example, that the Maori or the Sikhs aren't ethnicities. I don't think, for example, that if Josh encountered a Khoisan activist in South Africa, that he'd undermine his ethnic identity if the individual in question had some limited amount of Zulu or even white ancestry. Josh reveals in the documentary that he's half Jewish, so let's deconstruct that identity. There are three main Jewish ethnicities: the Sephardim, the Mizraim, and the Ashkenazim. Not one of these groups has a pure lineage that traces back to the Levant. The Ashkenazim, for example, underwent an ethnogenesis circa 900 AD when Levantine men moved to northern Italy and took local European wives. 100 or so years later, they became rather insular again and remained endogamous until about the mid-20th century. This is all well attested to in modern genetic studies, but do Jews accept this as grounds for the deconstruction of their identities or their claims on the Levant? Does Josh go around interviewing rabbis who think their lineage traces to King David? Does he no longer consider himself half of something that doesn't really exist? Now, one can argue that populations have always undergone change throughout history. This is basically how David Reich ends his book, Who We Are and How We Got Here. Quote, by demonstrating that the genetic fault lines in West Eurasia between 10,000 and 4,000 years ago were entirely different from today's, The ancient DNA revolution has shown that today's classifications do not reflect fundamental, pure units of biology. Instead, today's divisions are recent phenomena, with their origin in repeating mixtures and migrations. The findings of the ancient DNA revolution suggest that the mixtures will continue. Mixture is fundamental to who we are, and we need to embrace it, not deny that it occurred." Unquote. This increasingly seems to be a fairly ubiquitous attitude, as one commenter who replied to Josh's documentary stated, quote, "Populations change over time, specifically through migration. Do you think Egyptians today look like the ones who built the pyramids? Don't be silly. In 1,000+ years, an Englishman will have a completely different genetic makeup from today." Unquote. The problem here is that such changes in population destroy old ethnicities and create new ones. That's kind of the entire point of these deconstructionist narratives.
Turns out British white people in London are the minority, and the majority? Pakistan,
India,
France, Senegal. People from all races and colors.
There's some debate over the genetic continuity of the Egyptians following the Bedouin Arab conquest of North Africa, but there has been an undeniable change in identity and culture. No one today in Egypt speaks ancient Egyptian anymore or practices the old religions. Thus, it would be much more accurate to say here that in 1,000 years, there simply won't be any more Englishmen. Of course, all of this ignores the much more important concern, namely that the consent and the will of the English people to undergo such a process is being ignored and discarded. This too is ironic because supposedly the quote-unquote British values claimed as the foundation of modern post-war British identity very much involve the concept of consent, which mass migration clearly violates. I disagree with David Reich and others who share his views. We do not need to embrace any of this. Arguing that because population change took place in the past that we are now forced to accept it in the present is a lot like saying a woman must accept rape today because maybe her ancestors were raped in the past. Ernest Renan, who is considered by many to be the father of civic nationalism, argued in his work, What is a Nation, what he felt were the requisites for a national identity. He said that there must be a shared possession of a rich legacy of memories, including both glories and shared suffering. The forgetting of past historical divisions is paramount to the formation of a national identity, and there must be, in the present, a current agreement, a current consent and desire to live together, and the will to uphold the value of such a common heritage. Now, does any of this describe the relationship between the indigenous people of the British Isles and the vast majority of recent arrivals? If anything, the recent arrivals from the Caribbean, Africa, India, and other lands formerly occupied by the British Empire have repeatedly demonstrated that they have indeed not forgotten past grievances and do not feel a sense of past glory or shared suffering with the locals.
All of us here of Caribbean descent are in this country and have this relationship in this country because our descendants were removed from Africa, taken across the Atlantic, and put in the Caribbean.
What Renan stated, however, does seem to accurately describe the relationships between the Welsh, English, and Scottish, and what they have undergone through a long historical process that was, relatively speaking, organic. Yes, there was conflict, yes, there was brutality, but they have arrived at the end of that process, and introducing massive numbers of substantially more foreign peoples at this point upsets that hard-won and delicate unity. It destroys very unique traditions and relations cultivated over thousands of years in mere decades.